for launching and all. Thank you for lining up at gate number 2 for first accommodation. Once you are on the train and your boarding passes, these tickets for
Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about the short film you just saw. In this video, I'll cover almost everything I did to get to my final result. I'll go through all the things I learned along the way, the techniques I used along the way, and the struggles I had along the way. What I won't cover is every single button combination or modifier I used because I have over 50 hours of footage that would be impossible to squeeze everything in. So this is a condensed form of the best information I could give you about my process. If you would like some behind the scenes stuff, like tutorials on how I made these characters or how I designed this train, or just access to all these assets that I created and the entire blend file for the entire short film, you can get access to that on my Patreon. And with that out of the way, let's talk about my process. The first thing I do is collect almost every single piece of reference I can find. I spend hours just collecting every single thing that would help me define the mood and things I want to establish in this world. And when you have all of that selected, I always begin with a blockout. It's the foundation of any great scene. It lets me sculpt the composition freely before getting lost in the details, shaping the visual rhythm early on. The blockout stage doesn't have to be complex. Most of what you're seeing here started as simple cubes. It's not about complexity, it's about clarity. I'm laying down the bones of the composition. For the main building, I'm thinking proportionally, constantly refining the edge loops, Ctrl R, and extrusions by E. Simple moves, but they let me feel out the form. Modeling stairs is very simple in Blender. It's almost too easy. You just bevel by Ctrl B, and then in the options, you select the stair profile. The number of loop cuts becomes your step count. 2 loops is 1 stair. Pillars, same deal. Inset, extrude, and extrude again. It's repetition with intention. It's about how you choose to do those things. I wanted a larger administrative structure in the back, something simple, grounded. I rough it in, then start evolving the silhouette. Here's a rough rule I live by. Contrast is king. Blocky forms can feel heavy, grounded, but throw in a few sharp accents, an angled roof here, a sliced corner there, and suddenly it breathes. Notice how I hold off on details. There's a reason for that. Committing too early can box you in. The blockout is your sketch. You should feel free to change everything. Lighting is also part of that process. I throw in a sunlight early just to preview how these forms catch light. If a shape looks dull in sunlight, it'll probably feel dull later too. Side buildings come next. They serve more than one purpose. They serve as structure and, most importantly, leading lines. I use them to point towards the centerpiece. A few quick windows, nothing too dense. Details like this help add scale. Small scale window contrasted with this giant building help build scale. As it's still just blocking out, for background buildings, I just stack some cubes together using the Blender's quick cube tool. I scatter them in the back so they catch all the unnecessary light coming in the building from the back. Now, lighting becomes more important. This is where you start thinking mood. I want the front bathed in light, but I want the camera facing area to be darker, to direct the viewer towards the administrative structure. Lighting should always serve your composition. That's generally the whole point of lighting in movies, short films, any type of media you'll generally watch. Next comes the railway. I'll just block it out, but you'll see it eventually changes drastically, and that's fine because iteration is how you build scenes with detail. I love bevel graphs like this, cranking up your segments and then just sculpting the curve to give it a really interesting shape that contrasts nicely with these blocky structures. I spotted a building on Pinterest with elevated walkways connecting blocks together. Buildings like these add a lot of depth to your scene. Feels like something people would use, and visually it's just compelling, so I build it out. Now the main sculpture, the main centerpiece, is found this Soviet-inspired KFC that just screams brutalism. Extremely cool. Like, just imagine eating here, it's insane. So I obviously don't want to sculpt the entire thing out. I project it onto a cube and then I cut it out using box cutter. Now I'm not using the default knife, the K tool that you get in edit mode, because box cutter is just more intuitive and more fun, but you can also use the knife tool as it still does the job. I cut out the exact shapes to match the reference. From a distance it works. For close-up, no, it'll break, but from far away it absolutely works. Now I'll move on to another building. The main building in the background. Again, referencing from Pinterest. I don't want it to dominate, but it just needs some presence in the background. It adds to the shape of the main administrative building. It adds height to these flat and long buildings. It adds elevation. And for extra subtle detail, bevel individual vertices and push some booleans in for windows and make a nice rhythm out of the shapes. Perfect gaps, perfect number of windows together, and then perfect areas of rest. Adding a glossy shader to the windows to make them feel a little more alive. And I get a little sidetracked modeling this new structure. I honestly couldn't resist modeling. It just looked like a really fun shape. Modeling it was also very simple. Again, making it imperfect with different shapes, extrusions, bevels, distortions, booleans. Support pillars, using proportional editing, just push them in with a lot of edge loops. Mixing blocky elements with soft curves. It creates more visual interest. And keep adding smaller details. Contrast big with small. A well-designed building makes your world feel intentional, like it actually could be real. And while I do that, I stumble into an angle that I fell in love with. That locks the camera. Everywhere else will now respond to this perspective as well. This will be the second main perspective. For greenery, I use Botanic. Quick instancing, don't make it harder than it needs to be. For damage, I use the one-click damage add-on. I tweak it a bit to avoid the CG feel, but it definitely helps speed things up. Now I replace this sketchy sculpt with actual solid footpath. Also start refining some things using dynamic topology that's turned on in sculpt mode so you can have more detail into your shapes. Sculpting them out, especially right up close to the foreground, helps break the sharp CG look. Railings are pretty simple. Just extrude out a big shape, make it thin, add a big boolean in the middle, and with a cylinder, make it look interesting. And adding some chunky beams in the middle to break up the visual monotony that they bring. Some decorative trims, get arrays, bevel with a curve, make it look a little blocky, and array it. More booleans for windows and doors on the sides. I model out a door from a photo I found that looks really nice and has a big scale. A lot of these things just feel right. If you really respond to some certain image or thing you see, absolutely include it into your scene. And add the same reflective glass to the window. And right about here, I hit a problem. My scene starts to become a little more laggy than I was noticing before. And that's because of the poly count. At this stage, 22 million polygons. And I haven't even added characters, I haven't even modeled out the terrain that I wanted to. So it's time to optimize. Find the main culprits that are causing this issue. I use the Outliner's wireframe, which shows me the density of geometry in certain areas, and the bushes are the main culprit. Also the stuff like stairs, and I realize another thing. I've been using the array modifier, which duplicates geometry instead of instancing, as instances don't add to geometry while duplicates do. BaggerPie modifier has an array option which instances things, so I switch every single instance out for that. Then I remove my previous vegetation that I put down and instance every single bush, and instead of joining them together like I did last time, I put them into a collection. And now I instance that collection in Blender, as Blender allows you to do that. Now it's a single mesh that you can just instance anywhere, this collection of bushes, while taking up the poly count of just one bush. And doing all that drops the poly count from 22 million to 9 million. And that's the kind of things that you should be absolutely careful with. So now that we are optimized, it's texturing time. I use Quixel Bridge for most of my assets, but Polyhaven is also great if you want another free alternative. For the roads, I mixed two materials, one clean, one dirty. I used the mask to control the mix. Add in an image texture for that. Suddenly, your road has more life, grime on the edges. You can have a custom brush you can import. Bridge has a lot of them, which adds a lot more realism to your texture painting. And then decals. Textures.com has a ton of them, Bridge as well. These kind of overlay decals for dirt, build-up, scratches, grime, they bring these dull surfaces to life with minimal performance impact. You can see when I turn it on and off the amount of difference they make. I also toss in a roughness map onto the road for more subtle gloss variation. Stops it from looking so dull. Here, I was struggling to find a right texture. I was messing around with the UVs, constantly moving them around, and I felt stuck with just this one texture. And sometimes it's better when one texture doesn't work, just completely swap it out instead of trying to make it work somehow. I find myself sometimes getting stuck in that. And when I swap to some different texture, it just instantly fits. For the base concrete, which is very important because we need one concrete that textures basically every single big concrete structure in the entire scene. We will slowly build it up and add more detail as we go to it. For now, I will remove this warm tint that it has by turning the saturation to 0. That matches the statue above, feels colder, more brutalist. I add some imperfection textures to the albedo. Add a bump map, tweak it with color ramps to get that gritty, crunchy feel. It feels so much better doing that. Now, to guide the viewer's eye further to the center of the image, I throw in a bit of red. A red carpet. For that, I get a long plane subdivided by quite a bit, and then add collisions to the bottom and just cloth simulate it. And it just looks great right off the bat. So I just add another one and add a big plane in the center. Even if it's probably not going to be visible, it still adds a lot of red bounce light to the center, making the composition better. Then I start fleshing out more buildings. Nothing fancy, just the same extrusions, bevels. It needs to be impactful even if it's simple. Solid reference is everything here. At some point, I wanted to have a diagonal cut in the facade. It helps add something more interesting, as everything so far has been standard cubes. Then adding some large vertical strips, and in the middle add a lot of tiny horizontal windows. It's something about repeating these small elements that give the building a real sense of scale, especially when they're up against big flat concrete areas. It's this kind of contrast that makes brutalism shine. Now, one thing I always use in almost every single one of my scenes is the Blenderesse grunge node. It's amazing. Yeah, I just drop it in. It's a shader tree built in for some grunge, using ambient occlusion and edge data. I apply it to darken up the albedo around those areas, and it adds so much to this material. So I add it to the main master shader, so now everything has it. It's spread across all the buildings, and you can tweak it endlessly to get the perfect look. Then I model out another building using the same principles, just different interesting shapes that fit the brutalist vibe, and it might not even be in the focus in the final shot, but I want a reusable asset library for all of these buildings that I can just use for future short films in the same series. I scatter these buildings around the back and immediately the scene feels more grounded. That subtle layering does wonders. Volumetrics. I use 2 volumes in this scene. The first one is a simple white fog that envelopes the entire set. The second one is a gradient volume that darkens the background. It's intentional. Gives the scene that life further back in the city probably is more rougher and darker. Even though I hadn't fully visualized the train station yet, I kept circling back to my reference points. I knew I wanted something that feels grungy, decayed, but still cinematic enough. But for now, I scattered some pavement, added some grass with geoscatter, but any scatter plugin will do the job as it's a pretty simple thing. Then I reached for the bush asset I created earlier, and using that I placed 4 clusters right in the center. They just help fill up the scene. Now this is a stage where we are adding more and more detail. World building really kicks in. For me, that means going beyond just props and buildings. I designed some propaganda posters, slogans, layouts, and that felt that they belonged in this authoritarian regime. So I import these textures from Photoshop, then I debate between whether I want them to be red or white, but eventually I kept them red. The large railway sign was used using the Blender text tool. Custom font, which I used in everything including the title that you saw, which can be imported from clicking right here. To add some back scaffolding, we just extrude this shape and add some wireframe modifier to it. But something felt missing in the center. I kept looking into the scene and the center just needed something else. It felt a little too sterile. I needed a sculpture, maybe something symbolic. And after searching a while, I found a perfect reference that clicked. This really encapsulates the feel that I want this short film to have. So I build it out with blocky cubes all around. Then I decimate the human base mesh and then pose them. Figures climbing, falling, struggling, a hand sticking out. It's exactly what I want the world to be about. I refined the cubes into a more polished look using some sculpting, then UV unwrap them and place the same concrete texture onto them. Then I added some trees. This is where details like this start mattering. And now I paused for a bit, looked over the composition and realized that I had been kind of avoiding the railway tracks long enough. So I jumped into it, created some railings using Blender curves that I drew onto this plane. Took me a second, but I got a decent shape I was happy with, and then I put them in the back. And then I had to do something about these large concrete pillars, a little too loud, so I replaced them with a little more minimal street poles with a bit of a crunchy texture so they looked like steel. Then I started building this scaffold supporting structure. For that, always use reference. I'm no structural engineer, so it's about making something that looks just plausible enough. It doesn't need to actually work, but just feel like it could. And using real reference for that helps ground it out a little. Then I designed some LED info screens in Photoshop, some train schedules, some data on there, and some things that reinforce the world's cruelty and oppression. Like maybe getting executed for littering. Fun fact, you can animate these Blender textures with simple drivers onto the mapping node. Just put this in with the value depending on how fast or slow you want the textures to move. You can put the drivers in anything, scale, rotation, location, and now the station feels a little better. Then I moved on to modeling these ticket counters, more props for it. It's fun because in just a matter of few hours you can build all these small little things that don't take too much time. Now the platform itself where people will actually be boarding the trains. I give each part its own texture. Then the center texture, which has a lot of blocky concrete slabs, I extrude them out. Make them a little imperfect by rotating them a little bit. Imperfection is the key for realism. I also make these shapes at the train station that provide a lot of shade. First I model some beams for support and then bring in an image where I have to place individual edge loops to match the curvature as they're non-uniform. They're not uniform enough for me to just scroll to add edge loops. Then I give it a bevel and pull them up. Add a solidify modifier and then a displace modifier set to clouds with pretty sizable noise. That gives us the non-uniform imperfect realism. And then we can scatter them around. And then the train itself. That took 2 days to model. I'll have the full breakdown up on Patreon, the creation process and the blend file for the train model itself, including the entire scene of the short film. So if you're interested in that, check it out. After the train is finished, next comes benches with foliage. Purely vibe-driven design here. Something that made it in the final shot. And then I go on to add further small little things into this scene, like fire hydrants and streetlights. And then of course, wires. Wires help with a lot of things, adding small detail to the world and also acting as leading lines towards the back, the same direction as the train. Right now I placed some quick and dirty wires first to just see how they look. I also model out a fence on the side separating this boarding area from the main building walking area, just using a quick curve, adding the same chunky beam for support and then scatter them around. And it looks really nice. Then I come back to the wires. Now I actually hand make every single wire, make them sag, make them bundle on top of each other. It looks really interesting when wires hang on top of each other. Make some bundled up wires together in large quantities and then give them a basic material. They help add a lot of verticality and a little messiness into this really sterile and very clean atmosphere. Then I look into the scene and I realize I need some massive propaganda banners that are not really visible in this scene. I need propaganda to be oozing out of the scene. And for that, I add these banners. I use the same imperfection texture onto the PBR mixed in with the roughness, makes it a little more glossy in certain areas, just gives a little more of a gritty finish, and then slap on the slogans I created before. The scene felt empty in parts in the back as well. That side was really not taken care of properly, so I dropped some of these banners in the background as well. And now comes characters. I spent another 2 days just making characters, a bunch of them, a whole pack of them, simulating clothing onto them, making them animate and move in the way that I want. If you're curious on how I made it and would like to make some of your own using that process, you can check out the video that is up on the Patreon. Or if you just want to use the asset pack for yourself and use these characters in your own scene, I also provided the blend files. Once they were done, I scattered them throughout the scene, placing soldiers, civilians, adding subtle animations. One character near the camera even got a custom animation. He's reading a newspaper. And this part is easily the most fun, when the world starts moving and people inhabit it. That's when it becomes real for me. The most fun part of the process, period. And from here, it's all about cinematography, choosing the right focal length, playing with the movement and framing, just taking your camera everywhere you can and finding interesting spots like this one, where the train is going past this giant poster, this propaganda poster, and it just looks really good. I even altered the focal length for just this specific scene. Most of the film's shots were shot in an 18mm lens. I really wanted wide shots, as wide as possible. Now, it's just about a bit more polish, adding pipes to the foreground, finishing off some other things in the counter, adding more characters, polishing up the background population further. I do a smoke simulation for the train. It's also available on the Patreon if you'd like to use it for yourself. And then one final addition, a CCTV camera, because of course, a surveillance state wouldn't be complete without one. I rigged it up and animated it for the final movement subtly for that final shot. Now it's just more final tweaks to the lighting, using it to draw the viewer's attention where I want it to be. Just making like 1 to 2 degree angle changes make a big difference. That's what brings it all together. And finally, after more than a month of building and iteration, it was time to render. So I hit the render button and waited. It took nearly 50 hours. And then I jumped into DaVinci Resolve for the final edit, added sound design and stitched it all together. And that's how the entire Brutalist train station scene came to life. That's how I made the first short film. If you made it till the end, thank you very much for watching, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, maybe give the channel a subscribe, and if you want to see exclusive content, check out the Patreon. See you guys in the next video.